Hello, welcome. We're going to cover Chapter 15, Troubleshooting Windows Startup. So it's going to cover a lot of material in this. So we're going to cover our boot process, creating bootable media, implementing appropriate tools to solve our startup problems, tools to reimage or reload Windows, and then finally troubleshooting startup problems. Of course, first we want to understand the boot process, what happens when you first turn on that computer until Windows is loaded. If you know this process, the better you know it, the more likely you're able to solve a problem when it can't start. And then we're going to start with noticing differences between what a hard boot and a soft boot, right? So a hard boot is a cold boot. It's turning on the power with the on-off switch. It takes more time than a soft boot, and it initializes the processor and clears the memory. A soft boot, or considered a warm boot, uses the OS to reboot. So when you go to the Windows and click restart computer, that's a soft boot. You didn't use the power on and off switch. It initializes steps performed by the UEFI. In a hard boot, those don't happen in a soft boot. Those initial steps of the UEFI, it's just the OS. So it saves time to use a soft boot, and if a soft boot doesn't work, then you need to use the hard boot because it clears out everything and goes through those initialization steps. Now, the power button can be configured to do a soft boot, causing a Windows restart. The reset button, and it reinitializes the CPU and restarts at the beginning of the BIOS UEFI. So that's how you can set up the power reset buttons. The switch on the rear of the case turns the power off abruptly, and that's considered a hard power button. Right, so off the power supply, there's an actual switch on the power supply that you can turn on and off, and that kills all power to the PC. It's a very abrupt, so use that as a last resort. So when it first hangs, you try the restart from Windows. If that doesn't work, try a shutdown and power the system back up. If that doesn't work, do the reset on the front of the case, and if that doesn't work, then you use the power switch on the rear of the case. Turn it off, wait 30 seconds, let all the power subside, and then turn it back on, and then press the power button on the front of the case. So the UEFI, because BIOS you're not going to run into much anymore, is responsible for the early steps in the boot process. RAM holds inventory of the hardware devices, hardware settings, security passwords, date and time, startup settings, and then the UEFI reads the information and surveys the hardware devices it finds against the list kept in RAM. The UEFI runs a power on self-test or post, which is a series of tests to find out if the firmware can actually communicate with the essential hardware components. Then UEFI loads the boot manager and the device drivers. And then Windows Boot Manager reads the settings in the BCD or boot configuration database. I believe that's what it is. The Windows boot loader, the winload.exe, is responsible for loading Windows components. The Windows kernel, the ntoskRNL.exe, that's the Windows kernel. It does a lot of things, but mainly it activates the HAL and reads the more information from the registry and builds into memory the registry key H key local machine / hardware. So it's building from the registry. And the HAL is the hardware abstraction layer, so that it can talk with the hardware. the kernel also starts critical services and drivers that are configured to be started by the kernel. So if it's configured to be started by the kernel will start it. After the kernel starts all services and drivers, it starts the session manager, which is the smss.exe, which runs in user mode. The session manager loads the graphical interface and starts the client-server runtime subsystems, the csrss.exe, and then the session manager starts the logon manager, the win-logon.exe, and reads and executes other commands stored in the registry. And you'll see these services. You should see them in running your task manager. I go to task manager, and then processes. There's all kinds of Windows processes. Server. Let me see if I can't find it. Windows startup, logon, session manager, right? So here you'll see that they're running. And if I go into properties, right? No, it doesn't show me. Yeah, Windows 10 is a little different. You used to be able to see the EXEs running, but still, you can see that they are running in your task manager. The when logon starts the service control manager or services exe, starts the local security authority process, lsass.exe. This is when the sign-on screen appears and the user account and password are passed to the process for authentication. Once you're authenticated, you can launch the user initialization exe, the user init. It will start applying the group policy settings and any programs not excluded by the group policy that are stored in the startup folders and startup registries. You'll start to get those loaded. And then Windows startup is officially completed when the Windows desktop or startup screen appears and the pinwheel wait icon disappears. So that's the total Windows startup. And here is a flow chart on how to try to troubleshoot what's going on, where you're at. And then here's the OS kernel, what the kernel is doing. And then ways to start up or deal with problems. Okay, so while your computer is still healthy, you need to make sure you make and keep good backups. You want to create a system image. You want to configure Windows 10 to use the F8 key on startup, so when it's booting up, if you hit F8, you should get a boot menu. So it gives you access to advanced boot options, so it'll help you troubleshoot. You need to do create a recovery boot media. So either a DVD, a USB, or setup media created by the media creation tool. You need to do all of these things before you have a problem. Because if you have a problem and you haven't done any of these, you're in trouble. Or you could be in serious trouble. So here's the advanced boots options. If somebody, you press F8, you can do repair, go into safe mode, enable boot logging so you can log what's going on, go into debug mode, etc. Or start Windows normally as the last resort. When you create a system repair disk so you can launch it into the Windows RE and be able to boot in and do some repair tools. So to create a system disk, you can go into the backup and restore and create the repair disk. Windows 8 is hidden. Here's showing that right in the backup and restore Windows 7 version. You can create a system repair disk or create a system image, and what you want to do is create as a system repair disk. You also should create a system image, but we're talking about creating a system repair disk. Most computers that you buy today will have what's called an OEM recovery partition on the hard drive, and it contains the drivers for the specific computer. So for your video card, sound card, network cards, things like that, the drivers for those pieces of hardware will be located on the OEM recovery partition. Before a problem occurs, you need to back up this OEM partition to a Windows recovery drive, usually a bootable USB flash drive, so that you can access the repair tools and have all the drivers available. So to create a recovery drive, open Control Panels, click Recovery, click Create a Recovery Drive, respond to the user access control. The prompt is, are you an administrator? Are you sure you want to do this? Choose whether to include the system files. Then Windows will tell you how big of a flash drive is needed. You need to insert the flash drive, and if it's large enough, you can click Next and create the recovery drive. So here's an example of it saying it needs 8 gigs to create this recovery drive. And then once you have the recovery drive, you can launch from Windows RE, from the Windows Setup DVD or the flash drive. You can use the media creation tool on a working computer to create a bootable Windows Setup file or boot drive. So if Windows works well enough to get to the Windows desktop, you can also go to the Windows Setting app under Advanced Startup, click Restart Now, Shift plus Restart, click the power icon plus and hold the Shift key, click Restart. Command prompt, enter shutdown /R/O. These are all methods that you could restart into the Windows RE. But now when it can't restart, if you can't get into Windows and use one of those options, you boot from the USB recovery drive or a DVD system repair disk or a Windows Setup DVD or USB drive, and then press AF8 during the startup. Start Repair is a built-in diagnostic repair tool that can fix some Windows files without changing Windows settings, user data, or applications. To run the startup repair from the Windows RE environment, you drill down to the Advanced Options screen and click Startup Repair. Windows RE examines the systems, the files, imports what it did, and it generates a log file in the System32 log files SRT folder, and it's called SRT trail.txt. All right. The startup settings options on our advanced options screen is available only when Windows RE is launched from the hard drive rather than other media. So what these tools can do, you press 1 or F1 to enable debugging, or press 2 or F2 to enable boot logging. And here's an example of a boot log showing which was successfully loaded, and keeps going on until you find it stops, and then you can figure out where the problem is. Press 3 or F3 to enable low resolution video. So maybe a video driver is a problem, right? Press 4 or F4 to enable safe mode. This will turn off a lot of things and allow you to maybe boot, in case some application or other thing that's loaded is causing an issue, maybe a driver or something like that. Press 5 or F5 to enable safe mode with networking. So it's similar to safe mode, but now you are able to access the network. And then F6 or F6, you can enable safe mode with a command prompt. So then you don't go into the GUI, you go into a command prompt, and then you can run this system file check sfc/scan now to verify system files. And then if the problem's not solved, then you can launch system restore, which is the rstrui.exe. Press 7 or F7 to disable driver signature enforcement. So maybe you have a driver that's not signed correctly, and that's what's preventing your startup. And so you disable the check. So when you're testing new kernel mode device drivers, this is when this would be applicable. Normally you wouldn't do this, but if you are developing kernel mode drivers, this might be an option. 8 or F8, they disable early launch anti-malware driver. This allows the antivirus to launch a driver before any third-party drivers, so it can scan their drivers. But this would disable the antivirus driver. 9 or F9, disable automatic restart of system, so it stops rebooting upon encountering a system failure, because sometimes it'll just it'll get into an endless loop where it boots, it errors, it reboots, it errors, it reboots, it errors. And so this would disable and stop it from doing that, so you can actually try and do something. And then finally F10 returns to the startup settings screen. So system restore, the Windows RE Advanced option screen that you can get from Windows 7 System Recovery option screen, or within safe mode, or add a command prompt with the command rstrui. Any one of these options will allow you to open up System Restore. System Restore can cause a problem of its own, right? So Windows updates and updates to anti-malware software can be lost, and hardware devices and apps might need to be reinstalled, depending on where the restore point was taken from. You may, if you've added new applications or new devices, they would have to be reinstalled, and then you have to reapply any updates as well. But the system restore will not help you if the file system or registry is corrupt. All right, command prompt in Windows RE. You use this when the graphical interface is missing or corrupted, or if you know a specific command to fix a problem that you want to try. You have to have admin privileges, full read-write access to all files on the drive. Click command prompt on the Windows 10 Advanced option screen or the Windows System Recovery option screen. All right, use the SFC system file check or DSIM commands to restore critical system files. Realistically, the SFC with the scan now, that's probably your easiest option, but you can use DSIM also to restore system files. You can use the regular CD, copy, rename, and delete commands to manage data and files. You can restore registry files using those that are saved in the registry backup folder. After each fix, the reboot system to see if the problem is resolved. So you want to try one thing at a time, really, usually, and test and verify if you resolve the issue. You don't want to do too many things at once. And then you can use commands to restore the registry file. So the registry is located in the Windows System 32 config folder. So you rename all of the registry files. So you rename default to default.save, SAM to SAM.save, security to security.save, etc. And then you CD to the regback folder, which is one folder in. So inside the config folder, there's a reg backup folder, and so you go into there and then you copy the system to the registry backup of the system registry back to the C Windows System 32 config folder. So let me go here. So if we go into System Windows System 32 config folder, right? So you have the default, the SAM, the security, software, and system. These are your registry. But in the reg back folder, which you need admin access to get into, right? Hopefully, if you did a backup, you have backups of your registry, and then what you would do is you would copy that to here. You would rename the system, right? Dot save, right? And then you would copy the system from the backup up to here. And then you would do the software system, software default, SAM. You would do all of the registries that you renamed earlier. Okay. So if you have an actual hard disk, you could use the check disk and try to repair with a check disk /R. You can use disk part to manage hard drives and partitions. Maybe there's a problem with your partitions. Enable networking. So networking is normally not available in the Windows RE command prompt, but you can use the command WPEINIT to enable it. The boot record and the BCD edit tools you can use to repair the file system and keep boot files. So use the boot rec command to repair the BCD and boot sectors, the BCD edit command to manually edit the BCD, and the boot sect command to repair a dual boot system. All right, so if you're not a dual boot system, you don't have to worry about it. But if you've got Windows 8, Windows 10, or Windows 7 even, or something, or two Windows 10s, right? You might need to use the boot sect command to repair a dual boot system. And here's some of the commands that you can use to look at those. Right, so minor updates to Windows occur on the second Tuesday of each month, typically denoted as Patch Tuesday. Major updates are called versions, are distributed once or twice a year. If a new version is giving you problems, you can revert your system back to an early version as long as the version was installed within the last 10 days. You have not reset your computer during this time, and the Windows.old folder has not been deleted. This shows you how to roll back the updates. A repair upgrade is non-destructive for Windows 10 over an existing Windows 10 installation, but when you're doing a repair upgrade, keep these in mind. Create the Windows setup media either on a DVD or USB, or save an ISO file local hard drive. Probably you're going to use a USB most likely. Make sure that you can fully boot into Windows 10. Even though all data and apps and settings should be protected in the repair upgrade, you might want to back up just in case. You should always have a good backup when you're starting to troubleshoot any major issues. And then, of course, have all the product keys for any installed apps that you may have to reinstall. So if you install a fresh copy, make sure you have sufficient storage space. Fresh start. So during a reset, any apps or drivers that were installed from third parties will be removed. So you need to have those available. So make sure you have those available before you start. And some of your changes to Windows settings will be lost. So you may have to, reconfigure that even after you install. But if you're using a Microsoft account, you could have them automatically resync to the device when it's done. Right, so doing a system image, right? So you can use you reboot into Windows RE, drill down the advanced options, and select the system image recovery. Right, and then once again, most brand name desktops and laptops will have a recovery partition on the hard drive, and it contains all the OS information, device drivers, diagnostic programs, and pre-installed applications. It may or may not be hidden. You might have to look at the manufacturer's website for your computer to figure out how to access it. Or if it's corrupt, look for an option to download the recovery media from the manufacturer's website. And here's just showing the recovery option is healthy and it's there. And for here on this laptop, they have an assist button during the boot to launch the programs on the recovery partition. Your system may differ. Installing Windows over the network, you can boot from a computer on the network where it finds and loads Windows PE, not RE, but PE on the deployment server. So if you're installing Windows over the network, you have a deployment server. You would go into the UEFI setup and you would look for a setting that says to enable PXE boot or PXE support. You need that enabled to do booting over the network. And once again, you need a deployment server. PXE stands for pre-boot execution environment. And then so what it does is it enables the system to search for a server that provides Windows PE and deployment imaging. And so you're just able to turn on the machine. If there is a deployment server, it will find it, and then it'll give you options on how to proceed. If you've set up your deployment server with options to install. So follow the procedures to do a standard interview of the users. Make sure you back up important data. Research, identify any of the error messages, determine what has changed that could be the source of the problem, and then once you know what you believe is the source of the problem, figure out what tools will be the least invasive to use and still fix the problem, right? And then always start with, is there important data on the hard drive not backed up? You know, have you saved everything as well? You know, because they may have, you know, if you come there, they may have open files right there. You know, you make sure that they've saved all that. You know, hopefully the network drives, but also at least make sure it's saved before you start doing anything, as well as make sure it's backed up. So if its data is lost or corrupted, you can use Windows tools, Windows third-party tools, and some other data recovery services to recover it. Right, so problems that prevent Windows from booting can be hardware related, device driver related, services related, applications related, Windows files related. Startup error messages on a black screen, so problem usually caused by hardware, right? No OS found, a disk read error, invalid boot, hard drive not found, you know, no boot device, such as those. Problems with the user profile, right? You may have a slow profile load, right? Try the Windows Troubleshooting applet. Make sure all Windows updates have been applied. Run the SFC scan now. Fix any system files. Reduce the number of startup items. Apply a restore point that was created before the problem started. Right. You might try a repair upgrade. And as a last resort, you can create a new user profile. Right. So you can delete the user and keep the files, or delete the files. Delete the user profile. Now, error messages on the blue screen, which is also known as the blue screen of death. You don't see them as often anymore, but they're also called stop errors. They happen when a process is running in kernel mode and it encounters a problem and Windows must stop. So stop error can be caused by a corrupt registry, system file is missing or damaged, a device driver is missing or damaged, bad memory, or corrupt or failing hard drive. And stop errors can occur during or after a startup. And here's an example. Bad pool header, it's got a stop error code, and you can search Microsoft website on those two items, you know, the bad pool header or the stop error code. Either one should give you some information on what the issue is related to. Then search the website for what to do. You might want to try disconnecting any peripheral devices, reboot the system and read information in Windows error message box or bubble, and enable boot logging. You might have to restart a couple times. You might have to launch into Windows RE or safe mode with networking to try to figure out what's going on. Errors with hardware and device drivers. If the blue screen names a device or device driver that caused a problem, if it was recently updated, go into safe mode, open Device Manager and roll back the driver. Consider the device driver might have been updated along with Windows updates, so try returning to a previous version of Windows might help. A Windows update might fix the problem, and you may end up having to just use Device Manager and uninstall the device. It just may be that it's just no longer compatible with the newer updates. If the blue screen does not identify a device but names a program, open File Explorer or Windows Explorer to locate the program file, select Properties, and detailed tabs. Tells you the purpose of the file, and then you might need to reinstall the device or program that caused the problem. If you cannot start Windows in safe mode, use Windows RE, and then back up the registry, open the registry editor, drill down to the service or device, and disable the service or driver by changing the start value to 0x4, right? Here, and then reboot. So you would go into reg edit, UAC here, and then so you would try to find say the software or something, right? Or, see here, what are we looking for here? We're looking for a service or device, and the start code. Let's see here. Driver data, current control set, services. Let's just say start code, right? So this, say this was our issue, right? So our start value is 0, but we would change that to 4, right? And then it would turn it off. 0x4, and that would turn it off, and that's what they're talking about. So once again, you just go into registry, you go into the H key local machine, you go into the system, you go into services, you would find the service, and then whatever service it is, say it's this service, and you would change the start to 4 in hexadecimal, and then that would turn it off. But once again, back up the registry before you do that, before you make any changes in the registry. Check the event viewer, use task manager, stop and start services, perform a clean boot or a safe boot if you're not sure, undo any recent changes, consider using system restore, use the memory diagnostic tool to check memory, check disk/R to check hard drives if you're using a disk drive. And then if you think Windows is corrupt, you can try the boot rec rebuild BCD. You can check the event viewer for clues. Use the check disk once again, or the memory diagnostics. If no graphics appear, try a different monitor or a different video port. Try launching command prompt in Windows RE and use it to perform a system restore. And that is our Chapter 15.